Ladies and gents, welcome to another episode of Hidden Perspective. This is Rob Greco. It's good to be back, joined by my co-host Jules, looking very sharp in this, what can only be described if you're listening on the audio as a jazz outfit of sorts. Rocking a blazer and a nice what's that? A beret?
I don't know the proper name, but
yeah, I'm pretty sure. I call it a beret's the female one, but the guy one is I don't know.
It's my I call it my nonno capello.
Yeah, it's now you're looking very sharp, mate. How are things in Melbourne?
Things are good. Things are good in Melbourne. I've actually been in the country for the last week making music up there. It's been good. But the reason I'm dressed so sharp, Rob, is it's an important occasion. It was your birthday only
very
a few
important.
days ago.
Oh, yes, you remembered. No, it's thanks, mate.
I actually, FYI, everyone, I forgot to message him.
You'll make it up with a nice outfit. It's very kind of you, Jules.
How old you turn? 28 years old?
Turn 28, yes. Yeah, a couple of years away from 30, which you don't really want to think about in your late 20s, but it could be worse. And you've just had all your restrictions turned down, right? So you guys are able to party as much as you want. Yeah, essentially one day before my birthday, all restrictions gone. The first province in Canada to go full restrictions lifted pre-pandemic. It's exciting. Lots of people on the streets. Bars are packed. Lots of chaos when you go out in on the nightlife. No, it's awesome. There's we have this festival here in Alberta called Stampede, which is basically one of the biggest rodeos in, I believe, the world, and that's going ahead relatively restriction free next week. It's actually started this week, and we'll go to next weekend. So that's great. Everyone's pouring in. I think a few friends and I will go, and yeah, it's great. It's hopefully this is officially the end. We will see.
Let's hope so. And, I feel like it's important to do just a vaccine health check. So Rob got his Pfizer vaccine. Do you still have functional testicles? Have you lost any function in any limbs? How's your vision?
Yeah, no, everything's working. I feel like it's strange because there are some after we actually didn't even discuss this in our vaccine chat with Brendan, but there have been some reports of heart inflammation, myocarditis. Maybe if you're a doctor, you'll correct that pronunciation. But basically heart inflammation that's been potentially, some health authorities around the world are linking it to the vaccine. Others are saying we don't have a causal link yet. But I think, anyway, there's at least a highly probable link between the vaccine and this heart inflammation. And it's strange because anytime my heart gives way slightly and feels a little bit of tightness in the chest, you're like, oh, could this be the vaccine? But I think that is there's a heuristic for that, confirmation bias, taking in evidence and choosing to apply it to your situation. But no, I feel great. Vaccine, so far a good choice. How about you, Jules? What's the vaccine status?
And then wait till your babies pop out with 3 heads, mate. No, I'm good. Am I allowed to get vaccinated? I don't even know if we're currently eligible. They're sort of making their way down the age brackets. Although I think I am eligible, but yeah, I don't know. I'm I'll
reasonably skeptical.
Well, in all seriousness, I'm in a weird spot. So because I have an absolute IgA deficiency. So my immune system's
an IgA deficiency.
IgA, not the supermarket. Immunoglobulin A. So I'm missing a major component of my immune system, which has definitely caused some major problems in my life. So I have actually spoken to my doctors about it, and it's kind of, at this point, it's acceptable for me to be sitting and waiting to an extent. Also, potentially the opposite, if the virus was really seriously spreading in the country, maybe I'd need to be really careful and and get vaccinated ASAP. So I'm not sure, because sometimes with people who've got,
they don't always recommend the vaccine. That's right.
Yes, with people who've got immune system problems, they don't actually recommend the vaccine because I've already got a misfiring immune system. So I don't know what to do. I actually need to speak to my doctors about it again. I mean, we spoke about it a long time ago now that the vaccines are all out and stuff and circulating. I'm not sure what the specific advice is for my situation. But,
well, that's interesting, because if you do fall into that category, you have a really interesting perspective that I've always wanted to discuss, because advocates for potentially forced inoculations, or at least, mandated in the workplace, their argument is that it goes beyond a matter of personal choice when there are people in the population who are vulnerable and can't get vaccinated. So you have to force the vaccination on everyone to ensure that those who are at risk by virtue of not being able to take the vaccine, you have to offer those people some type of protection. How do you feel about that, forced mandatory vaccination argument if you would potentially be the person that they're seeking to protect?
I mean, I haven't looked at the data for the sake of my own mental health. I wonder if people with total IgA deficiencies just drop dead when they get COVID. I don't know. I mean, people with IgA deficiencies, they're way more likely to die of more traditional lung infections, because IgA is a part of the immune system that fights viruses where mucus exists.
Right.
So in my gut, in my sinuses, in my tonsils. So historically, I've had some pretty big issues. And it's generally for fighting bacteria, also for fighting viruses. What we know about the virus in the lungs is that it's not actually like a build-up, right? I mean, I've started, YouTubing all this stuff. So it's not like there's a massive build-up of fluid in the lungs. That is what happens. It's not like a traditional pneumonia, right? It's like this really awful destruction of cells and inflammation in the lungs that stops people from being able to breathe. So I wonder if I'm more at risk. Obviously, I would be if I'm not vaccinated compared to someone who is. How do I feel about people placing me more at risk by not getting the vaccinations? I don't know. I don't think people should be forced to get vaccinated.
Yeah. I think we could do a whole podcast on that, but let's just... I agree with you on that. All right. Well, you had a little special... birthday article in keeping with the birthday theme that we were projecting for the episode.
Look, Rob,
Jules.
You're one of the nicest people I know, Rob. I love you dearly. You're a great man, very generous of spirit, always thinking about the greater good. And it's funny because in the same week you had your birthday, so did the Chinese Communist Party. They had their 100th birthday. Ooh. And, we know that they couldn't be a nicer group of people. So let's examine this particular article and this general narrative that was presented. And I'll sort of start by saying that what you hear a lot, and you certainly hear it from the CCP, is that their lack of freedom they offer in their country, that is, and like, how could you summarize that freedom? Well, when we're talking about, okay, what are the human rights abuses of China and how are they justified? Well, let's start with how they're justified. This idea that the CCP has done this miraculous job of stemming and curing extreme poverty in China. And we'll put that to one side, and then of course there's human rights abuses, like if you were to in any serious way dissent against what the CCP is trying to do, you generally end up in jail or dead. And of course, if you're a Uyghur, right now you're having your children confiscated from you, you're being sterilized, and being forced to work in concentration camps. It's the largest group it's the largest ethnic group to be placed in concentration camps since World War II and the Nazi concentration camps for Jewish people. And I reckon and I was thinking about this the other day, it was certainly the case that under that lovely Nazi regime in Germany, a massive justification for the central control and lack of freedom was the improving German economy and the improving outcomes for German people. So we've seen this before, but anyway. All right. And then during so there was the 100-year celebrations, and obviously, China organized this huge propagandist, big ass birthday party full of guns and millions of people singing nationalist songs, and it was well reported. And this narrative, this idea that the CCP leverages its centralized control and its lack of freedom to improve poverty, it just keeps getting spun around. And then there was this awesome ABC article that I want to review because to me it shows you how deceptive and manipulative and pervasive this narrative is, and how quickly you can see that it doesn't make sense when you examine the details properly, right? Because and so as we go through this article, what I'd like to say is, what are the specific levers that totalitarianism has that allows for and has allowed for China to start to prosper? Like, what specifically about it? Like, why did it need to be done under a totalitarian regime? Why do we need to not afford these people human rights in order for them to have left poverty, right? And actually, for at least the first 70 years or maybe 60 years of CCP rule in China, I'd argue that they instigated, some of the most intense poverty in history. Anyway, let's look at the article, Rob. All right, can you see that, Rob?
Yep, we're good.
Now, this is a very trendy article. Look at all the fancy graphics and shit. All right, so it's the 100-year anniversary, and the article starts with this discussion of Yin. That's not his name. He's a Chinese Australian. He doesn't exist because he was born into a family that had already had a child, right? And so China was really strict about their one-child policy. So old mate Yin here lived a very difficult life. It was basically, kind of wasn't allowed to go to school, basically lived in a closet, wasn't really allowed out of his house, suffered massive vitamin D deficiencies, and a lot of families did have second and third children and basically had to hide them, right? So it's an example of some of the pretty intense things that China has done in order to deal with things like poverty, like overcrowding, right? So the one-child policy, a policy among many, right? So it starts with this, it talks about him, and then it says here, the authoritarian regime transformed China so rapidly that today the nation identifies as both an emerging superpower and a developing nation at the same time, right? So 100 years since its founding, 72 years in power. So rapidly. I don't know that it's 100 years is that rapidly, Rob. But anyway, right? So the communists don't make
comparable
decisions.
Countries as well. You have some comparable Asian countries such as South Korea and Taiwan who have had even more rapid. What word would you use to describe 20 years if 100 years is rapid?
Yeah. Well, anyway. So, okay. The CCP makes decisions that impact, blah, 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 right? So we still don't know much about how the party runs its affairs, right? So, and then this is where the article, it gets really cool, right? Single party rule, a visual primer. So single party rule, a visual primer, right? So because this idea of a single party rule is really complicated, Rob. What's involved is understanding that there's basically a structure.
Oh, there's just one guy. Wait, I'm just looking at one guy.
So old mate here on the left, he's in charge, right? And then he's got a bunch of other gangsters that sit underneath
Xi
him.
Jinping, for those
right?
playing at home.
There he is, and then look at this fancy graphic. Premier of the State Council, he does this job, and old mate, he's the internal regulator, so he kills everyone that causes any problems. And then you've got, and then we've got this guy, and here's another the United Front, and the National People's Congress, is, and then here's all the gangsters sitting on the front, right? So, okay, this is great, and in all seriousness, though, this is informative, and it is explaining the way that the party functions, right? And it obviously is a huge institution, and there's shitloads of people, right? Here, China does hold elections for local representatives.
Mm-hmm.
All candidates must be CCP approved.
Right.
No photos or candidate information are provided, only a name. So,
okay,
really good elections there in China, Rob. Really good elections. Okay, so and of course, here's the one woman in the elected CCP, right?
Yep.
So, in a nation with 680 million females, there are no women in the top rank, and only one in the Politburo, which is like this sort of important, like cabinet sort of thing, right? So,
right. Yep.
Awesome. All right. So we're looking at all these graphics, right? Ethnic minorities, and then you've got which of course are totally excluded from the CCP. But anyway, we keep going. So difficult decisions, and this is where I start to get really fucking angry, right? So this little section here, single party rule allows for significant policy changes and difficult decisions to be made without much political fallout from the Chinese people. It also means that long-term targets can be set and political decisions made without concern or worry that an opposition party will gain popular support or unwind policy every few years. So when Chairman Mao decides to instigate the Great Leap Forward and try to transition the country out of sort of basic farming into these sort of centrally organized communes and ends up starving 55 million people to death and shrinking the economy maybe greater than any single action, he's able to do it. And when anyone whinges about it, he gets to kill them and remain in power. So that's an example of what single party rule allows for. Significant policy changes where it doesn't matter how many people you kill or starve, you get to remain in charge. Really fucking helpful, right?
Right.
So, for example, the idea of population control. Okay. And that's a pretty favorable example to put forward, isn't it, Rob? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and sure, that's an example, and you could, and I think people have argued that it helped, but it's also created this pretty awful situation of infanticide where families that were birthing daughters simply just killed them so that they'd eventually have a male.
And as you touched on, people living as second-class citizens because they need to hide the fact that they're a part of more than a single-child family.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is an example, and they've decided to really follow hard on the one-child policy, right? And it's important, this idea of, and it's a really interesting story, the idea of these people who just have to hide their existence from the world because they were a second or third child. Following the turbulent decade of the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and 70s, Mr. Deng's economic reforms transformed the country from being one of the world's poorest to the second largest economy on earth within a generation. And I think I would accept that. And let's just be clear what those... It is undeniable. And what was that? What was the central part, Rob, of that really important economic reform?
Oh, well, not the economic reform, Jules. It has to be the single party of the CCP, the single leader party. That's what the journalist is saying, aren't they?
Yeah. So what was the economic reforms? The economic reforms was abandoning the certain impoverishment of communistic fundamentalism.
Of course, I'm being sarcastic. That's right.
And allowing foreign countries, the West, to come in and invest an unbelievable amount of money because obviously China had this incredibly huge labor force that you could pay very little to hire and make shit for you. And then and basically Deng decided to open up the country to foreign investment and also start to, over a very long process, embrace principles of capitalism, right? And this is just kept going on further and further.
Economic liberalization.
Right. So here's what I don't understand, right? And then is why China needs to be totalitarian, have a single party rule for it to have experienced these economic reforms. And then to describe the Cultural Revolution in the 60s and 70s as turbulent. Rob, the Cultural Revolution was probably behind, like is up there with Stalin as the most intense purge of dissent in human history, right? Like, we are talking about the mass murder of everyone who was in opposition to the CCP. Right. So, this is just a pathetically favourable description of what's going on, and it's also excusing or just basically not including the amount of starvation that the communists brought to China in their first 30 to 40 years of rule.
Does it not mention economic liberalization or anything about the negative consequences of totalitarian rule? Nowhere in the article.
We'll go on. No, we'll go on. Okay. So,
I wanted to do a little sanity check.
So, senior CCP members, the ABC approach, have declined to speak about the controversies that arose out of its policies or how difficult decisions are justified. Yeah, no shit, fucking journalists, because if they talk to you, they'll be found sent to re-education camps where they'll be tortured, bullied, and threatened with death.
And that's the key feature of a totalitarian rule is you don't have to discuss any controversies. You don't have to discuss anything that goes wrong. Or you can do it on your terms of reference.
No, more interestingly, I wonder if the people who wrote this article are these senior CCP members, because they seem to have been pretty concerned. They seem to have been pretty concerned about making any major criticism of the CCP. Anyway, let's keep going. So, Mr. Zhang Tang, right? He worked in the United Front, some big, department, whatever. He's a defector. He decided to leave. His job was to monitor religious groups, enforce the one-child policy. He says he never once disobeyed an order. Of course, he can't say that he did, but anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then it starts to talk about the function of the party, the way that people try to... the way that you progress in the party is by making sure who's above you likes you very much, Similar to working for a major corporation. Anyway.
Right. And by the way, if you're not viewing this on YouTube, just listening to the audio, this is an extensive article. Jules has just been scrolling nonstop, and we're still not at a point where they fairly criticize the totalitarian rule. But anyway,
despite its socio-capitalistic wealth, the CCP is still guided by communist principles like democratic centralism and collective leadership.
Okay.
What the fuck does that mean? Democratic centralism, despite its socio-capitalist wealth. Basically what it means is, despite abandoning the principles of communism, the ones they wanted to keep were the ones that said 9 people can be in charge and you can all do what you say, and if you disagree with us, we're going to fucking kill you. That's what that sentence means. Anyway, these ideas strive for leadership through consensus and unity. Hey, next time I have a disagreement with my band, I'm going to bring a shotgun, point it at their fucking heads, and I reckon I'll get some consensus pretty quick, won't I, Rob? What a joke. Okay. Given that more graphs showing that the Central Committee is on top, like, what the fuck? Anyway, all right. Now, here's where I get really annoyed. Okay? The CCP is definitely different. As a ruling party, it is very much supported, but I wouldn't dare say it's supported by the majority of people, because it wouldn't dare to announce a general election in China. Interesting.
A general election?
The CCP is now the longest running and most successful communist party in human history. Again, I'd like to go for a walk down Shanghai and explain to me what about the fucking place is communist, other than everyone is scared to death because they're being monitored 24/7. Right? Some say, right, Tiananmen Square, right, blah, 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 blah. Oh, yeah, that's right. They kill everyone who dissents. In 2020, the CCP claimed that it achieved its centenary target of eradicating absolute poverty across the country.
Mm.
Now, here's what's interesting. When the CCP claims something, and is anyone in any position to challenge this idea? For example, is there, like, what evidence is presented? And if you decided to challenge the CCP on this in China, I don't think that would go very well for you.
How do you get to verify? Yeah.
How do you verify any of these claims? How do we know how much poverty has actually been removed from China? Clearly, a lot of it. Clearly, it's a very wealthy place now in parts. Right. But I don't know. And these achievements aimed at improving the lives of hundreds of millions of Chinese people are front and center of its celebrations today, and people's belief in them will be critical to maintaining its legitimacy in coming years. And this is the point. This narrative and what this article has basically decided to just regurgitate is straight up CCP propaganda. They remind everyone that it's okay to not have any rights. It's okay to not be able to dissent. It's okay to be ethnically cleansing parts of the country because, hey, we've made you all richer, right? And if you're going to present that argument, it's like debating 101. It's like arguing 101. You need to prove the causality, Rob. You need to actually explain what about these levers makes it central to still being totalitarian, or how could you organize the country if it didn't have a single party rule? Well,
right.
That's what the article should have been about. It shouldn't have been about just...
If the claim is that authoritarianism per se is what leads to these, huge reductions in absolute poverty, into these, huge economic gains, you need to prove that every authoritarian regime has the same results. Otherwise, well, you don't have causality. You've cherry-picked one example. And the same is the inverse. You also need to prove that no capitalist country, no capitalist democratic country, even better, capitalist democratic country in an Asian setting was able to achieve similar reductions in poverty and similar growth in economic prosperity. And that's patently false, because if you look at how many Asian countries who are intensely capitalist and democratic, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan to some extent, now with some interesting happenings regarding China itself, but all those three countries exist. So,
yeah, it's in 1979, meat and rice had to be rationed. 1979. So what's that? 40 years of communist rule, and people had to get a coupon from the government to buy them. In 2020, Beijing reportedly eradicated extreme poverty and is aiming for a moderately prosperous society in 2035. This success is important not only materially but also politically, for proving what Beijing sees as the superiority of the authoritarian system. Rob, if you're a journalist, your job is to grab CCP propaganda, rightly assume it to be misleading, manipulative, and politically favorable, and to examine it and examine its validity, right? Prioritizing pragmatism over strict ideology. For example, inviting foreign investment into its communist tradition has been integral to the CCP's success and domestic popularity. Are you fucking kidding me, Rob? Abandoning the bamboo curtain, letting the West invest in your country, and embracing capitalism got everyone out of poverty. No shit.
I think that's my favorite sentence I've ever read in a piece of journalism: inviting foreign investment into its communist tradition. In other words, it's no longer communist. No, but we get to still be in charge, you see? So everyone's been allowed to go and make money in China, but it's been on this very clear condition, which is that as long as the CCP doesn't miss out, okay? It doesn't miss out and lose control, all right? And that's been the exchange. There hasn't been this exchange between, authoritarianism is going to get everyone out of poverty. No, it's that authoritarianism is important to the CCP. And they still haven't, has been inviting foreign investment into its communistic tradition. Do you need to be an authoritarian regime in order to let Nike go and build a bunch of factories in your fucking country? Is that what's necessary for Nike to come here? Or would Nike have been there 40 years earlier like they were in Korea and Taiwan? Bullshit, okay? And then we get to this stupid ambassador, right? Despite criticisms of the Chinese system of governance, its legitimacy has been sustained by vastly improving the lives of hundreds of millions of citizens. No, they didn't. The CCP didn't do that. Nike did that. Coca-Cola did that. All the Italian manufacturers did that. All the car manufacturers did that. What a joke. Hey, come and make money here. That's not a quote, right? Its legitimacy has been sustained by vastly improving the lives of hundreds of millions of citizens. The journalist genuinely believes that. Who is this journalist?
It's the Asia Pacific ABC. And there's a bunch of them written down. Okay. So, but, and then, as recent times have demonstrated, with infringements on Hong Kong's democracy and Uyghur re-education camps in Xinjiang, it is clear that this is not the case, right? As in, China hasn't decided to become more democratic. No, it's ethnically cleansing at the worst rate since the fucking Holocaust. Anyway. Right? Western capitalism has suffered reversals, a financial crisis, a credit crisis, a crisis of confidence, and their self-conviction has wavered. Right? Okay? And this is now quoting Xi Jinping's speech at the 100-year party. Okay? So they must stop lecturing us on human rights and interfering in our internal affairs because they're a bunch of hypocrites, blah, 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 blah. And yeah, it goes back to the one-child policy. And yeah, there's this quote from this ambassador, and of course he says, Rob, you can't eat democracy.
You can't eat it.
You can't eat democracy, as in, you know, everyone wants freedoms and rights, but you know, what's the point of freedoms and rights?
Democracy won't provide you food.
Won't provide you food, you know, and whereas you can eat authoritarianism, Rob. You can eat the shit out of that, you know. And I like my authoritarianism served with a side of bacon, all right, and sweet chili aioli.
Oh, jeez. I think
that was written by the ABC, and it was clearly a lot of effort put into it. Had all those beautiful graphics. It went on for ages.
Sorry, could you bring that up again? The article again, because there was something interesting I noticed at the very end of the article. I've never seen this before in an Australian article, but at the very end, they offer a direct Chinese translation.
Correct. And yeah.
Which, I mean, Chinese people are more than welcome to read this, but does anyone not think that's strange? Does that happen regularly with the ABC?
I don't know, but you know, I'm starting to sound like Alan Jones, but seriously, Rob, that if you're a journalist and what you write looks really close to some sort of CCP press statement, like you're not a fucking journalist, you know? And if you're going to talk about poverty and the CCP and you don't talk about the Great Leap Forward and the first fucking 50 years of mass starvation that they instigated, then you're not a real journalist. This article is utterly abysmal, you know, and to just casually go past the concentration camps. What?
It's a strange bedfellow, potentially a left-leaning or right-leaning, but you know, I'm guessing a potentially left-leaning Western journalist and the Chinese Communist Party, because of some set of progressive thought who like the idea that more government control, more government direction, and bureaucracies know better than self-directed citizens, and therefore that's a good thing for society. Do you sense that there's any of that? I mean, what are the motivations of this person? Do they genuinely politically believe in the CCP political project? I don't know, it's so strange. Let me be very clear on where the glaring lack of assessment lies in this article. And I think we've said it again, but it should be stated again. If I'm going to say that there is a benefit to fighting poverty and improving the wealth of a country from having a lack of human rights and democracy, I need to go into detail explaining why that's the case. We were literally given 3 sentences, and they were, it's more easy to go for long-term goals because you're not worried about having your long-term plans reversed by some other party that gets brought in. So they can, you know, for example, in Australia, it's often said, you know, that, you know, governments don't go for long-term reforms anymore. It's all about winning the election cycle, you know? And maybe we should have, instead of 4 years in party, 8 years in party. Bipartisan support, yeah.
So that you know, you could implement difficult tax reforms in the first 3 years of the first 4 years of your your tenure, and then you could persevere with things that take time and are difficult, and then if we elected people over longer periods of time, they'd be able to achieve more long-term reforms, right?
Right.
What are the examples in this article of the reforms China made to improve its situation? They were the one-child policy, and inviting Western money into their communistic tradition.
Inviting foreign investment into the communist tradition. I'll never forget that quote.
Rob, do you need to be a single-party, authoritarian, mass-murdering regime to let foreign investment into your country?
Like, that's the necessary condition, according to that person.
That's what it takes.
What a bloody joke. Yeah. And a complete dismissal, ignoring silence on a fairly comparable regime in the sense of communist and authoritarian being the Soviet Union, and no discussion whatsoever when the Soviets in the 80s, when they realized that the jig was up and they had to eventually liberalize because there are too many breadlines and too many people without food, that they went on an excursion to the UK, and they went to the London School of Economics, and they asked, I see everyone every day getting food with ease. There are no lines. Which committee is in charge of ensuring that happens? And the economist at the London School of Economics says, precisely no committee, and precisely that's why it fucking works.
ABC. I was watching Mad as Hell, and he's amazing, Sean McAuliffe. He's so funny, and he made a sarcastic joke, which is that people think the ABC is run by a bunch of crazy communists. When you're publishing junk like that, I can't defend them. I can't defend this crap. That is abysmal, Rob. It is utterly abysmal, utterly pathetic. And there's a bunch of people sitting in concentration camps that people at the ABC really give a shit about. That should feel very uncomfortable about hoping to be well represented by this pathetic. And the thing is, it was highbrow. It was like a centerpiece on the website. You saw how much fucking time and energy was put into it. They dedicated
so many resources into that.
It was a shitload.
How many people would have been involved?
At the fucking Chinese, all these credits at the bottom and all these researchers. What the fuck did you guys research?
Incredibly strange.
Okay, and so let's be real. Let's be real. What is China? China is a brutal dictatorship that has abandoned all of its Marxist ideals.
Right.
Has coerced its own population into being obsessively consumerist. Right. After the GFC, they realized if they wanted to keep growing, they needed to stimulate domestic demand, right? So you walk through any part of China, right? I've spent a bit of time in China. I've spent nearly 3 months in China. And I know it's different depending where you go, but most of the time you're in China, you feel like you're walking through the never-ending shopping mall, okay? There's nothing fucking communist about it. Everyone's wearing very, very nice clothes, okay? Drinking the world's most expensive wine.
They have the latest technology.
All the truffles, all the phones, all the fast cars, they're all in China. There's nothing communist about it, okay? The only remnant of the communism is the fact that it's now a real life 1984, okay? And that it's a decrepit Orwellian universe. And this narrative is so toxic, and the fact that you can read some heavily invested in ABC article and have it sit alongside CCP propaganda, and the fact that it works in parallel motion with that is a fucking disgrace. And I would stand side by side on Ellen Jones right now. God help me. God help me. Look at what they've done to me, News.
No, I think that was a point well made. It dovetails nicely in two respects to what I wanted to bring up in this podcast episode, which is one, media malpractice, and which is number 2, CCP cover up over potential Wuhan lab leak. So the media desecration of its own standards isn't limited to how they actually talk about the Chinese Communist Party, but just the complete backflip is what I really want to mention. The complete backflip in how media outlets in the West primarily have performed in regards to the source of the coronavirus. So in other words, was the coronavirus created in a wet market, as we were all led to believe in the early parts of 2020, or did it in fact come from a lab leak from a lab within Wuhan? And Jules, I've got a few articles which I think neatly demonstrate my point with how frustrated I am by not only the complete backflip, but by the conviction that people had last year when they reported on this, and the lack of humility this year when they are self-correcting and realizing that they were totally full of shit last year, when we have now mounting evidence that COVID could have indeed come from the lab. So I've got a few articles here, and so Jules, you took aim at the ABC. I'll take aim at the ABC, but first the CBC, which is the Canadian equivalent here, which is what I've been surrounded by the last few years. So we have an article from the CBC, Andrea Bellemare, from March 24, 2020, and the headline reads, "No, the new coronavirus wasn't created in a lab, scientists say." And she goes, "One of the most persistent and widespread pieces of disinformation during the COVID-19 pandemic has been the conspiracy theory that the novel coronavirus that causes the disease was created in a lab and was let loose either by accident or on purpose by some nefarious actor. The theory not only lives on social media and internet message boards pushing conspiracy theories, but has been publicly floated by politicians. On Sunday, Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Allah Khamenei, raised the idea that SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, was created by the US government. According to Al Jazeera, Khamenei said he didn't know how real the theory was, yada yada. But basically the thrust of this article is they have genuine proof that the theory being promulgated by none other than, we heard it first from the CCP, Jules, our friends, that the virus was caused by a bat in the wet markets, and that any suggestion that it was caused from a lab leak is totally conspiratorial, has no evidence, and should be consigned to the wackiest places on the internet. 1 year later, the CBC, why the Wuhan lab leak origin theory of COVID-19 virus is being taken more seriously. 18 scientists signed letter calling for inquiry into COVID-19 origin. Now, everyone at home could do this exercise for any of their favorite media outlets, any of the media outlets that they deem reputable and they deem free of disinformation, free of misinformation. You're free to do that, because I also did it with the ABC, Jules. And we have, the 17th of April, 2020, the ABC. Coronavirus may have come from a Chinese lab. Wait for it. If you believe Donald Trump, but experts disagree. And obviously, the premise of this article is that anyone who believes COVID came from a lab believes in Donald Trump and therefore should be dismissed. But believe it or not, Jules, 1 year later, that same outlet, the ABC, Wuhan lab leak theory investigations ongoing, 18 months after the arrival of COVID-19. And then the ABC, our best mates, as we've established in this podcast episode, again, on the this one is part of their Signal program from the Signal team, which is, I believe they do, little pieces of investigative journalism. Did COVID-19 leak from a lab? and then they have some experts and they discuss. And basically the evidence is, I implore everyone to do their own research, but the evidence is that there were people who were working at the lab which contracted coronavirus, much earlier than the first previously known case. So, back in, September, October last year, 2019, there are certain characteristics about the lab that make it unlikely that it did come from a bat, jumping to a pangolin, or as they previously established. But the point is, we just, if you don't know what caused something, if you don't know, and this point is amplified, if you don't know what caused the thing that instigated the most catastrophic economic, social, and political disaster in our lifetime, potentially for the rest of the century, your job as a journalist isn't to say that it's not a theory that you can't falsify. It isn't to believe exactly what comes from the mouthpiece of the authoritarian regime from where the virus first emerged. Your job Rob, as a journalist is to be skeptical of all theories, weigh the evidence, and if you don't know, you say, we don't know.
The media is more likely to be distrusting of Trump than they are of the CCP.
Spot on. Spot on.
It's fucking outrageous. Fair enough. Donald Trump, is he a serial liar? He is. Guess who else is, Rob? Can someone please show me a list of all of the dissenters Donald Trump had assassinated in the last 4 years? Can I see the list? Seriously. Is he a mass murdering lunatic?
Yeah. And then
is he currently instigating the biggest fucking ethnic cleansing since the Holocaust?
But apparently today on my iPhone, on my Apple News update, I got let's find this stupid headline. Why it's time to start calling Trumpism fascist. So the subtext for the guy who spent 4 years leading the most powerful country in the world is that he was a fascist, and fascists of the past, he implemented fascist rule, he got rid of democracy, he didn't allow for the election that, eventually kicked him out, not to mention that the most powerful companies in the world, being, Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, have successfully taken him off all the airways, because now we virtually live online, but yet just the mere thought of Trumpium is now fascist, where at the same time a similarly credible institution, the ABC, can't say one bad word about a genuinely authoritarian and dangerous regime being the CCP.
Look, here's where it's interesting, because the other day I watched, it was either Four Corners or Foreign Correspondent, and there was some, in fact it wasn't, I think it was a Vice, I can't remember, but I watched some investigative journalism into the concentration camps in China. But we're not mates with Trump. I'm not down with Trump, right? When Trump talks to you, should journalists be straight away thinking, "Oh, how's he lying to me this time?"
Lying, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely should. When Scott Morrison has a chat, should you be sitting there thinking, "Oh, what's he going to say? How's he going to lie?" Absolutely, right? And when you're dealing with the CCP, it's not have they lied, it's just how they've lied. Yeah. So it's like, it's just.
Yeah. But I think, to play devil's advocate here, just very briefly, you should be able to admit when China has done incredible things. And if a CCP policy has caused some good outcomes, and you might want to understand what policies have they implemented that worked, you should be able to adjudicate that. But that requires you to, verify that. It also requires you to say when that could be wrong. It requires you to bring some, journalistic mindset to the actual problem. And I absolutely agree with Jules. I, would not have voted for Trump. Didn't like most of his policies, maybe did a couple of okay things. But, the idea that, going back to Lab Leak, the idea that if Trump said something that could be right, your opposition to how heinous he is requires you to reject wholesale everything that he believes. He's the fucking president of the United States. It's likely he's getting the best intel. If he tells you that intel from some of the top scientists who are going to advise him every fucking day in a pandemic, and he says it could have come from the Wuhan lab, which is going to help us prevent the next pandemic if we can actually verify the source of where the pandemic fucking came from, then that's a sensible thing to journalists to say, okay, the person with the most intel is saying this. Maybe it could be true. It's not to instantly define ourselves in opposition to everything he says, which is going to delay and stall and complicate, solving this pandemic and making sure we're prepared to prevent the next pandemic.
Couldn't agree more, Rob. And these authoritarian regimes, they've got form on this. Like Chernobyl, right?
Right.
They just lied endlessly the whole time.
Yeah.
Lied to their own population. lied to all the border countries.
Any journalist, exactly. Any journalist with their grain of salt would have known that in this pandemic, the CCP lied. They covered it up in the beginning. They didn't tell us all the evidence. They didn't allow fact-finding missions, which is actually ironically why Taiwan, who went independent much earlier than everyone else, was able to have a much better response than the rest of the world. They lied about whether there was asymptomatic transmission. There was just an absolute plethora of mistake, and mistakes have been by no means limited to the Chinese government in the pandemic. I think most governments have made absolutely terrible mistakes throughout the pandemic. But if they have such a poor track record, why would you blindly believe on face value the first theory that they promulgate?
Because I think because it was a political football. I mean, China had been a political instrument for Donald Trump the entire time he was in power. And I would say on China, I enjoyed Donald Trump starting to talk about China.
Right.
And challenge them on things. I mean,
you can hate the man, but agree that part of his policies made sense.
I supported the trade war stuff. I mean, I think that the double standard in China is fucking outrageous. Australia is an enormous trading partner with China, but it's entirely on China's terms, right? In every meaningful way.
Right.
And they bully, cheat, they manipulate the prices of things.
Wholesale fraud of IP. Yeah.
I think the idea that it leaked from a lab implicated China in a poor way. And Donald Trump really wanted to push this China thing. He's calling it the China virus, all the rest of it. Now, maybe that was too far. Maybe does that stuff lead to racism? I don't know. There's me going on and on about how the Orwellian CCP sucks. Yeah. Does that make me racist? I don't think so.
Yeah, but I think I should do a little bit of throat clearing, which I probably should have done at the beginning of the episode. But is that nothing that Jules nor I are saying about China implicates anything about Chinese people. It's precisely about the authoritarian regime and the system of government, which we're criticizing. This is nothing about Chinese people. Because every Chinese person I've met is, one of the nicest, most hardworking people, and I have friends who are from China, and would say nothing, critical of Chinese people, but it's the regime. But Jules, back to your point, you can't talk about the virus coming from a lab because it poorly implicates China, but yet somehow, blindly accepting that the virus came from a wet market, and the implication being that Chinese food was dirty and you shouldn't trust their forms of, hospitality and agriculture and the way they produce food. How is that not painting China in a much more negative light? How is that not painting China in a much more racist way? The labs suggest that, they're an advanced country. They obviously have very intelligent people. They have investment. They're working on advanced medicine. That paints China in a much better picture, in a much better light. Potentially, their safety wasn't up to scratch, but still, you would much rather have it come from a lab, I think, if you were projecting yourself as a developed, advanced country like the other article was referring them to. Wouldn't you much prefer the lab leak? If your concern was racism as a journalist.
Yes, I would. But I think what you're saying is persuasive, but I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about these women who are currently being sterilized, and it's like, how this there can't be a discussion around PR.
Right.
Like, oh no, China's had a lab leak. That's really bad for China. China's killing and sterilizing and abducting people's children. like, what fucking difference does it make if they fucking gave us coronavirus as well? These people are a pack of cunts, and these people that I'm talking about. I had the graphic up before. There's fucking 8 of them, and there's there's one guy who's on top. But
it has nothing to do with the millions of citizens who are just trying to get by.
No, and the whole everything I explained before was how all of the people who live in China have no fucking say on any of this stuff at all, right?
Right.
So I was talking about a very specific group of people, Rob.
Yeah.
This tiny amount of people who get to sit and be in charge of the CCP, and like there's like 10 of them, and they're all men, and they can all go to hell. Like it's just it's the reason. Like, and you're right, and because these two instances, right, and I think this is maybe a good place to summarize. Lab leak being dismissed so early on in the piece. The reason why this matters is because it's really important to stay open and investigative to issues that are as significant as that, right?
That's
like,
right.
Where did the virus come from? How was it originated? You know, there's potentially different realities for treatment and for vaccine development and all kinds of things based on the fact that it doesn't seem like it had natural origins, right? So, and this is a really important story in the history of the world, right?
Absolutely.
So media outlets deciding to just shut things down in this instance is serious. And what I would also say is serious is that the CCP is an awful, ethnic cleansing, totalitarian, human right destroying, growing global superpower, and it's in my opinion, it's important that they're treated as such. And when the ABC writes an article and puts all that time into an article celebrating the 100 years of the CCP and basically regurgitates CCP propaganda, to me the stakes there are really, really high. Because when the CCP wants to fund institutions at all our major universities and the Liberal Party starts bringing laws to stop that, thank God, right?
And
it's
the Confucius
important.
Institutes,
Right. It's important those things are kicked out of our fucking universities because they're funded by the same people that are currently sterilizing young girls. Okay?
And
the shit, it's not immaterial. You can't write one sentence about this, Rob, about these concentration camps. You can't write just one sentence about how committed these people are to instituting what they want and how little they care. Oh, society. No, they just care more about society than the individual. That's the communistic tradition. Right. Okay. So why do all these Muslims need to be sterilized and killed and tortured and sent to concentration camps and re-educated? For the societal benefit.
And to be completely fair, like dismissing China as a, dismissing the CCP as a completely evil, government outfit does not abdicate you from your responsibility from implying similar pressure and criticizing the atrocious things that have been done in the name of the Australian people through the Australian government and through the American government. You know, the fact that we're only now, Biden is saying that we're the US and allied forces are going to be leaving the Middle East now, 20 fucking years after the trade centers fell down. Literally, there are American soldiers serving in the Middle East now who weren't even born when the Taliban forces took down the World Trade Center. Weren't even born. So, the amount of innocent blood spilt due to our involvement, which, mind you, was highly fueled by a media class which wouldn't examine conspiratorial claims about weapons of mass destruction. And we just blindly believed the intelligence agencies in the Five Eyes and around the world, what have journalists learnt? You cannot blindly believe any intel that is immediately fed to you by a government outfit, whether they be a Western government outfit, whether they be a secret service agency in the West, whether they be a Chinese government outfit.
No, and you're right to say that these governments that are democratic, I mean they're probably pseudo-democratic, and they're probably as in Australia and all the rest of them,
right?
And to a certain extent, and we can go on with some sort of corporate class, and conspiratorial nonsense. But
alliance.
The point is, you're right to say that it's not just the CCP, right? But the Australian government's not sterilising people. It does have, I think, a couple of hundred refugees in detention.
Yeah, some heinous conditions.
Some of them have been in there for 10
Yeah.
years. Australia's got, is currently imprisoning every second Indigenous child.
Right.
Right? Australia's age of youth imprisonment.
Yeah.
Australia's age of criminality, I think, is 10 years old.
Yeah. Some highly illiberal drug laws that we continue to preside over.
Right. So there's very, very, very serious humanitarian issues with governments all over the world, but we can't possibly take the CCP as seriously and legitimately as that article did, that article was disgraceful.
And with that, Jules and I are hopping onto Sky News with Alan Jones this week to continue our absolute tirade against the CCP.
I think they're all insane.
And one final thing, if you enjoyed this episode, please spread the word and let your friends and family know about it. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button and notification bell. See you next time.